Welcome back, everybody, to Pattrn. I'm going to give you a number here. 41 million Americans are living with disabilities. This is according to the Census Bureau. And when we look at the bigger picture, 1 billion people, or 15% of the entire planet, have some sort of disability.
And with a population that large, you think that this disabled community would be part of our discussion when we're talking climate change, and yet they're not. That's according to a study out of McGill University. Professor Sébastien Jodoin joins us to talk about this. Professor, thank you for being with us this morning. So how are people that, are living with disabilities, why are they more vulnerable when it comes to the impacts from climate change?
Well, there's really two reasons. One is their underlying impairments can create challenges. If you have certain illnesses, you might be more sensitive to heat, for instance. But the main reason is that we have inaccessible readiness plans, inaccessible emergency and evacuation plans. And we've seen that over and over again, even in wealthy developed countries like the United States or Canada.
So your report kind of just breaks that down for us, and kind of breaks down, too, that a lot of us are just ignoring, the folks with disabilities when they're trying to make plans for climate change. How do we come to the table and make sure we bring this topic up when we're talking about climate change remedies?
Well, there's lots of expertise in the disability community around how to design spaces and programs that are accessible and inclusive. And really, it's incumbent on the climate policy experts and activists and policymakers to consult and involve people with disabilities. And in fact, the United States is actually the law. So the Americans with Disabilities Act very clearly states a number of requirements that have not been followed over and over again in a number of severe weather events that we've seen in the United States.
Mm. Yeah, it's been a fight for a long time to make sure everyone is created equal. Let's talk about finding accessible housing and transit. What are some ways that we can make housing and transit both accessible and climate friendly at the same time?
Well, as far as housing is concerned, we have all these programs, right, to retrofit buildings, make housing more energy efficient. If we're going to be doing that and rolling out these plans and these subsidies, we should also be trying to make houses more accessible and buildings more accessible at the same time. It just doesn't make sense to have one renovation crew come in and change the building in this way and then 2 years later do it in another way. When it comes to mass transit systems, we need to make sure that these are accessible. If you look at maps of the subway system in New York, most stations are inaccessible. This doesn't make sense, not just for people with mobility impairments, but parents with strollers, people who are injured a given week, people who are transporting heavy things, right? So we can see, in fact, that the more accessible we make things, it doesn't just help and is not just helpful for people with disabilities, but it actually benefits everyone.
Is there like a tiered system here when you look at something like this and you say, okay, those with mobility issues go to the top of the list, let's address that first. And then maybe it's visual impairment and hearing impairment. And then I guess there's something called invisible disability. So how do they go through? Because there's a lot we could list here. How do you do everything for everybody?
Yeah, look, it's always going to be a challenge, but this is what good design is supposed to be, right? Is meeting the needs of as many people as possible, and doing that in an iterative way. You're not going to get it right away, so it might take some time. But when it comes to buildings and transportation, I mean, the United States has decades of experience, has all the expertise. There's really no excuse, and that's why cities like New York and Los Angeles have lost lawsuits where courts have found that they had failed to make their emergency planning processes accessible because they have the resources, they have the expertise. It's just not happening.
Yeah. Now, is there anything us as individuals can do to help this cause, or is this an issue that we just have to go to our government leaders for and they have to do it?
Well, I think for one thing, we can see that in a number of heat waves and other severe weather events, when there are people with disabilities that are dying at disproportionate rates, if you know of someone in your family or in your community that might be isolated or that might not be able to access emergency planning or messages, then of course providing them with assistance, checking in on them would be really important. But yeah, basically it's putting pressure on policymakers, but also environmental campaigners who also haven't really done a lot of work to build bridges to the disability community.
Yeah, I'm glad you came on, Professor Sébastien Jodoin, because, thank you, by the way, Canada Research Chair in Human Rights, Health and Environment at McGill University, because I'm thinking of all the conversations I've had
It's never been brought up.
It hasn't been part of the conversation. And so I'm going to now make sure that I bring it up in the conversations that I'm having.
I remember there was a nonprofit that I was on the board at that deals with just this, but it's more like getting those with disabilities in the job force and being very inclusive. And they said what was the term they used? It was like, we are the best hidden secret. Or it was something to where like, we cheer ourselves up internally, but we need everybody else to know what we're doing because there is so much of this. And I think if we bring it to conversations like we're doing right now, it just sparks the awareness. And now, maybe moving forward, we will have those conversations.
That we will. I know we will.